Okay, today we're going to talk about eukaryotic cells and how they actually came to be. So this is going to be a multi-part lesson. I'm not going to be able to get to everything in this one video, so there will be a part 2 coming up. So first, I want to be sure you all understand the difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote. So we're going to do a little Venn diagram. And obviously where they intersect is what they both have in common. So prokaryotes were the first cells on Earth. When life began about 2 to 3 billion years ago, these were the first types of cells. They're single-celled organisms. They're all unicellular, which means the entire organism is one cell. They're very small. They belong to the domain bacteria and the domain archaea. There's only 3 domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, and 2 out of 3 of them are prokaryotic. And they are much smaller than eukaryotes. Now, as far as eukaryotic cells are concerned, they have a nucleus. They have membrane-bound organelles. They have a cytoskeleton. One second. They're much larger than prokaryotic cells. In fact, they evolved from prokaryotic cells. Okay, guys, 1 second, please. Okay. So what we're going to, almost forgot. What do they have in common? So they both have DNA. They both have RNA. They both have ribosomes. Ribosomes do not have a membrane, so they are capable of being in prokaryotes. They both have a plasma membrane to separate the outside environment of a cell to the inside environment of the cell. They have cell walls, which are meant for protection. And both can be unicellular. All prokaryotic cells are unicellular, but there's a few eukaryotes that are unicellular too. One thing I want to say is that eukaryotes can be multicellular. I'll left that out. Like you, me, most fungi, and all plants are multicellular. All right, so let's get into where did all these organelles come from? And organelles are basically mini organs. I'm sure you remember from Honors Bio, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, ER, lysosomes, all those different types of organelles. We're going to identify where they exactly came from. So there's 2 theories. Now remember that theory has evidence, it's been proven, it is backed up, it has been verified. Okay? We have the infolding theory. And we have the endosymbiotic theory. So for the infolding theory, this is also called the endomembrane system concept. And this is all meant for transport, moving things from point A to point B to point C to point D all throughout the cell. The components of the cell that are involved in this endomembrane system which we're going to get more into on the next video. But you have the nucleus, you have the endoplasmic reticulum, you can call that the ER so long as you know what that stands for. You have vesicles, which are like little transport carriers, like kind of like a garbage bag. You have the Golgi body, or the Golgi apparatus, as you've likely heard of it before. Lysosomes, vacuoles. We'll go over all of these in the next video. The plasma membrane. That about covers it. Let me make sure. Nucleus, vesicle, ER, Golgi. Yep. Okay. Now the endosymbiotic theory is just about the power organelles. And that's mainly going to be the mitochondria and the chloroplast. Okay? Now, I want to make something very clear to all of you. Is 4 years ago, when I taught this class, I tried to make very clear to my students that the endomembrane system and the endosymbiotic theory, or the endosymbiotic and endosymbiosis, are very different from each other. All the organelles that are in the endomembrane system are involved in transport. And the organelles that came about by the endosymbiotic theory, which is known as endosymbiosis, they came about, or excuse me, they're responsible for power. And so I try to make very clear to everybody that the mitochondria and the chloroplast are not part of the endomembrane system. Despite that, still had a few students that still included that the mitochondria and the chloroplast are part of the endomembrane system. So I was a little frustrated with that. So I wonder, how can I get across that they are not part of the endomembrane system? So 3 years ago, I stood on a table, I stomped on the table just to make a scene and kind of made myself look silly, just so everybody would remember. And I shouted to the rooftops, the mitochondria and the chloroplast are not part of the endomembrane system. And still I had a few students write down that they are part of the endomembrane system. So I pulled them aside and asked them, why did you write it? Do you remember me on the table? Do you remember me making a fool out of myself? So you would remember that the mitochondria and the chloroplast are not part of the endomembrane system? And they said, yeah, but we honestly just got the words confused. I said, what do you mean? So I got endomembrane and endosymbiosis crisscrossed. So, well, it's an honest mistake. It's an avoidable mistake. And I want all of you to know that it happened to them, it can happen to you. Make sure you study and you know that there's a difference between the two of them. We're going to go into this deeper. So the first thing we're going to discuss is the infolding theory. Which is also known as invagination. So this is how the endomembrane organelles came to be. Well, here we have a prokaryotic cell. And in this prokaryotic cell, you have process number 1 and process number 2. Now, if you notice, there is no barrier separating process number 1 from process number 2 going on inside the prokaryotic cell. They can overlap, they can interfere with each other, they can disturb each other, and that can definitely cause some problems when you're trying to do two separate things within the same area. Imagine if Mr. Ferlita and I had no wall between his room and mine. You would hear him shouting, you would hear me shouting, you'd hear him talking about math, you would hear me talking about bio. Kids would just be confused, it'd be crazy. So you need to have some sort of barrier between the two of them. We need to have a membrane. And so, an invagination began to form. This little groove right here that's forming inside the cell, kind of like it's caving in on itself, that is called an invagination. This is the infolding stage. Well, we now have 1 and 2 are starting to become more separate. Next, we have area 1, area 2, and area 3. You're starting to get a new little compartment there. I want you to realize that the plasma membrane, you know, the phospholipid bilayer, looks like this. Oh, should probably use a different color. Looks like this. The phosphate heads, lipid tails form a double membrane. You remember that? That's what this red line right there means. That is the plasma membrane. This is the compartmentalization stage. And then finally, we have an organelle. So we have 1, 2, 3. What you all need to understand is that this organelle, this little pocket that is formed, that is separating the inside from the outside, from the outside of the organelle from the rest of the inside of the cell, is also made up of a plasma membrane, a phospholipid bilayer, actually. And so we go from having no compartment to an actual compartment. And this is the birth of endomembrane organelles, organelles that are meant for transport. So let's go over what's happening. Cell membrane infolded to create compartments, and then completed the infolding to create organelles. And the whole goal was to be able to compartmentalize, so you can have multiple processes going on without interfering with those other processes all at the same time. Okay? Now, a few things to consider. All these organelles, all the ones I listed up above, all the organelles in the endomembrane system are the result of invagination. And invagination is just basically a fold pushing into the cell to form a new little pocket. And we call those pockets little organelles. All right? Now, for the second idea, Endosymbiotic theory. This one's a big one, or we can just call it endosymbiosis. If you look at the words, you have several Latin affixes here. You have endo, which means within. You have sym, which means together. And you have bio, which means life. So this is basically life living within, or life together within. So in this idea, you have a small prokaryotic cell was engulfed. And the actual word that we're looking for is phagocytized. It basically means that it was eaten for food by a larger prokaryotic cell. So, you know, guys, there's a saying, there's always a bigger fish. You had a large prokaryotic cell engulf a small prokaryotic cell. Typically, the smaller prokaryotic cell would have just been food. It would have been absorbed and engulfed and broken down for energy, but that didn't happen. The small prokaryotic cell was useful and did not get digested. So before we go any further, I want to remind you guys what symbiosis is. Here's a little pop culture reference. I'm sure you've heard of Spider-Man. That's a horrible, horrible Spider-Man. So if you're a Spider-Man fan, I apologize. Well, one of Spider-Man's main villains is someone that actually kind of looks like Spider-Man. His name is Venom. And Venom is actually based on the natural symbiotic relationships that occur in nature all over the earth. Venom is a man and an alien. It's basically a man coated in a costume that's actually an alien kind of slime. And throughout the comic and throughout the movies and the cartoons and all those, they say that the alien is a symbiote. It's an organism that depends on another organism to survive. Well, in nature, there's three basic types of symbiotic relationships. The first one is mutualism. We call this a positive relationship where both organisms benefit. A local example is Busch Gardens. They have the hippo enclosure in their Edge of Africa exhibit. And in the hippos are massive mammals. They're herbivores, and they spend a lot of time underwater because their bodies are so massive that it's easier for them to move around when they're buoyant and when they're actually kind of off their feet when they're in the water. Well, if you go to Busch Gardens, you'll see that in the water that they have for the hippo, that there's hundreds of fish. You're wondering, why would there be a bunch of fish? The hippo is not going to eat the fish. It's a herbivore. The fish are there to help out the hippo, and the hippo is there to help out the fish. There's a mutualistic relationship there. The hippo goes into the water, and the fish just come swimming all for the hippo, and they're going to clean every nook and cranny in that hippo, behind the ears, between the toes, in the butt crack, everywhere. They're going to get the dead skin. They're going to get ticks, parasites, you name it. The hippo then opens its mouth, and the fish are going to clean out its mouth, get all the ticks and parasites and any bacteria in its mouth and clean them up like you would at the dentist. And the hippo comes out squeaky clean. The hippo gets cleaned up, and the fish get a meal. It's a win-win situation. Next is going to be commensalism. In commensalism, you have one organism that benefits and another organism that doesn't benefit at all. So we say it's a positive, neutral relationship. An example of this would be sharks with remora swimming underneath them. So in nature, there's often these fish. And these fish are swimming along with sharks. Now, unlike what a lot of movies will have you think, sharks are not mindless killing machines. They only eat when they need to eat, and they're not going to go around and find random things to kill. Well, these little remora are hanging out with the shark, and the shark doesn't care. The shark just wants to go on with its day, but the remora are going to, some of them can actually latch onto the shark with a little suction cup they have on their head. And so the remora get a free meal whenever the shark feeds. They get protection from the shark, and they actually get a free ride from the shark. So the shark gets nothing from this, but the remora actually do get something. So it's a win-neutral relationship. And then we have parasitism, which is a win-lose relationship. This would be like a mosquito with a person, a tick with a dog, a virus even. Any organism that has to have a host to survive is called a parasite. And so in the actual movie Venom that came out a few years ago, initially Venom turned out to be a parasite, and it was killing its host. But towards the end of the movie, they came to an agreement, and they decided to work together to fight the bad guys, or the worst guys. All right, so here's what happened. Here we have a large eukaryotic cell, and here we have a small, I'm sorry, I apologize. That green is a large prokaryotic cell, and this is a small prokaryotic cell. Well, the big prokaryotic cell is hungry, so it's going to engulf the smaller prokaryotic cell for food. But then something strange happened that really shouldn't have happened. The small prokaryotic cell did not get digested. It became part of it. And what I need you all to realize is that this green layer right here, that is a phospholipid bilayer. Just like what we have. And this right here is also a phospholipid bilayer. But when the larger cell engulfed the smaller cell, it basically gave it a second membrane. So this is now going to be the outer, and this is going to be the inner membrane. And this little cell provides energy. I'll put an E for energy. So rather than be digested, you're going to have a mutualistic relationship. The big green cell is going to provide the little red cell protection and give it food. And in return, the little red cell is going to give the big green cell energy. This is how the mitochondria and the chloroplast actually came to be. Those are the power organelles. So we need to have evidence for this idea. You know, we can't just go around throwing out ideas without anything to back them up. So is there evidence for endosymbiosis? You bet there is. As far as this is again, I want to remind you, this is the origin of the power organelles. And that would be in the mitochondria and the chloroplast. Okay, piece of evidence number one. These organelles have a double membrane. No other organelles have this. And you're like, well, what's the big deal with having a double membrane? It's because it was engulfed. That red membrane is the original membrane belonging to what was once a prokaryote. The green membrane is from when it came through the plasma membrane, was engulfed. So to recap on that, the inner membrane is the cell's original membrane, and the outer membrane is the larger cell's vesicle formed from its plasma membrane. So you're looking at the Golgi, you're looking at the mitochondria, or excuse me, the Golgi, the ER, the lysosomes, they only have one membrane. But the power organelles have two, and that's how they got it. Number two, these organelles have their own DNA. The DNA that is in the mitochondria and the DNA that is in the chloroplast is different from the DNA that would be in the host. In the host, I shouldn't say the host, in the nucleus. So if I were to take any one of your cells, like let's say a bone cell, brain cell, heart cell, whatever, you all have a nucleus inside all those cells, and inside every nucleus is a full copy of your DNA. The DNA that's in your nucleus is different than the DNA that's in your mitochondria. This is because a long time ago, the mitochondria and the chloroplast were once their own living things, and they were engulfed by other cells, and they became part of those cells. They were kind of like held prisoner, and they would have to provide energy for those cells that they were engulfed by. And to this day, your mitochondria have different DNA than yours. Next, these organelles have their own ribosomes. Well, as I said in that Venn diagram, prokaryotes have ribosomes too. You don't often see ribosomes in an organelle, and here's furthermore, these ribosomes resemble prokaryotic ribosomes. Pretty peculiar, pretty coincidental, huh? And then finally, number 4, these organelles are the same size as prokaryotes. So we have 4 pieces of evidence. They all point to one singular idea, that the energy organelles, the mitochondria and the chloroplast, used to be their own living things, their own organism. And they were engulfed by a bigger prokaryotic cell. And that is how these energy organelles actually came to be and helped form a eukaryotic cell. Because eukaryotic cells all have mitochondria. All eukaryotes. And I'm talking about plants, animals, fungi, and protists have mitochondria. You know, when I was in high school and I had a really great biology teacher, and he once told us that animal cells have mitochondria, plant cells have a chloroplast, period. That's not the whole story. Plants have mitochondria too. Know that. They don't just do photosynthesis, they also do cell respiration. Okay. All right, that is it for this lesson. Remember, this is going to be part 1. Part 2 will be following up. It's going to be lesson 8, eukaryotes. In video number 2, we're going to break down the endomembrane system and all the organelles that compose it.